So he was there in summer of 1980. And Maharaj begins to speak about the vital power, this shapeless, formless, textureless, structureless power. The Sanskrit words would be prana, the ancient Upanishadic term for the vital power. You could also think of this later Hindu word Shakti. So this prana Shakti, this vital power, is the divine, Maharaj says. This is the God of your world. Without this vital power, you don't exist. You can't move, you can't feel, you can't think, you can't do anything. Nothing exists without this vital power. So he said, get acquainted with this.
There's a lot of mystics on the internet. Shout out and much love, you crazy fools, that could use dusting off a textbook or two warmly, without judgment. And secondarily, there are certainly a lot of scholars in academia who would be well served by eating a mushroom. So I'm trying to bridge those two worlds. I'm Bob Peck, and this is Karmic Relief.
My background is in documentary film and comparative religion. I wrote a book called Original Sin is a Lie: How Spirituality Defies Dogma and Reveals Our True Self.
It's an interview show where I talk to spiritual teachers, activists, scholars, people that live within these traditions and also appreciate the overlap. What happens when you start to get activated internally, that makes you activated in a compassionate way in the world. I'm thrilled to be talking to fantastic, inspiring human beings. I have to do much less work, which is nice because I'm just asking them questions about their story. It's a life hack.
Hi.
I hope you'll enjoy these explorations, these really excavations. And the ones I've filmed so far, they've all been really beautiful and deep and lighthearted. So please enjoy Karmic Relief. I'm Bob Peck. I wrote Original Sin is a Lie, and now I'm asking a bunch of questions to intelligent, compassionate humans.
Timothy Conway is who I want to be. He is a scholar of religion and theology, as well as a deeply experiential mystic for over 5 decades. He sat with Nisargadatta, and he has a master's and PhD in psychology from the California Institute of Integral Studies. He wrote one of my favorite books of all time, Women of Power and Grace. Listen to his bio. Timothy Conway, a figure in the dream, pointing to the divine dreamer, has studied and practiced the non-dual essence of our sacred traditions since the early 1970s. He has met many enlightened masters, especially in Advaita Vedanta, Sri Nisargadatta Maharaj, Sri Ramana Maharshi's immediate followers, and others, and various lines of Buddhism, as well as spiritual adepts in Daoism, Sufism, and mystic Christianity and Judaism. Timothy has freely shared the pathless path of deep spirituality since the late 1980s. We cover a lot of ground, and he literally starts the conversation by dismissing his academic accomplishments. On his site, his education section begins with, "Much ado about nothing." Unfortunately, some of our audio isn't perfect, but hopefully you can endure it. It came out much better after editing, and I used a few corrective filters. In this episode, we get to at least 2 very important concepts. One is dispelling the myth of anatta in Buddhism being no self, and the harmony between instant enlightenment and gradual awakening. Please enjoy this episode of Karmic Relief with Timothy Conway.
My guest today is Timothy Conway, PhD. He is a deeply experiential mystic alongside of impressive academic letters. Dr. Conway's incarnation is a huge inspiration to me, as I'm about halfway far along as he is in both mysticism and scholarship. So deep bow to my older brother here in oneness. Dr. Conway, Timothy, I'll call you dear Timothy, for the interview. But so glad to have you. There's so much to cover, frankly, because your website is
quite a tome. You've written several books, and there's just a lot to cover. So thanks so much for joining.
Yeah, let's just meet in the simplicity of the divine nature, dreaming all of us so gloriously. What an awesome divine power that can dream up a cosmos and sustain it moment by vanishing moment. So in the simplicity of God, all the PhD stuff and books and all that, it's interesting foam on the great ocean of divinity.
What I'm trying to do, I think, in as humble a service as I can offer, is balance these two worlds. I think that you're so firm in terms of having an appreciation for scholarship, having an appreciation for research and scriptural study, which has value and has benefit for people. I think there's a lot of people, respectfully, as egolessly as I can say this, there are people out there that are teaching, making material within spirituality that some spiritual study could be beneficial to them. And at the same time, Timothy, to your point, there's a lot of scholars and professors of religion and theology who make it all about the letters. And to quote Sri Ramana, sink into the background. You're focusing on the letters and the punctuation, and the space behind the letters is where the truth is, right? And so how can we honor in a yin and yang Taoist-like level of awareness of the value of these two systems, the deeply mystical experience alongside of the scriptural foundation?
Well, so much verbiage has been shared over the 2.5 millennia, basically.
Right.
2 3/4 millennia, going back to our most ancient wisdom text, the Upanishads. And then before that, more kind of mythological, magical kind of utterances by human beings, some of which was recorded in stone and so forth. So a lot of this verbiage is really sacred in the sense that it points listeners, readers, right back to the heart of reality, the heart of their own deepest core, pointing them right to the essence of everything they see and experience and the beings they interrelate with. In other words, the best kind of words are those that point to divinity, reveal divinity in a certain way, because our core divine nature is, I had to coin a word, subvious. It's not obvious as an object, and people trying to find the self or God or the spirit as an object wind up getting very frustrated, and needlessly so, because the great revelation made clear by words and by silence and by profound intuitive blessing force or resonance power around true sages, those who have allowed the divine wholeness to make them holy, truly. The great revelation is God, or the divine, or the Brahman, Atman, reality, true self, Tao, Buddha nature. Great Spirit is always right here, always now. Before one can even think about the divine, God is always already your truth. God is always already the case, as Ramana Maharshi said. So the words are paradoxical. God is always already our truth. What else could be here? What else could be vividly allowing experience to seem so vivid, so real? It must be this divine reality, the one doing everything and being everyone. So every moment of your life is actually an experience, a formation, a moment that's manifested by the great unmanifest, who's powering everything. And as I often say, the one who emanates all beings, animates them moment by moment with a vital power, and is orchestrating all these beings. in their relationships, in their coming and goings of the personal consciousness or soul or jiva, as they call it in India, with the body. I mean, every night in sleep, you leave the body behind for a subtle realm set of experiences and dreams. And then way beyond that, just to what might seem to the waking mind like pure oblivion, but it's pure rest. In what? In pure spirit, pure open awareness, infinity, boundlessness, structurelessness, colorless, spaceless, timeless reality, pure being. So this divine truth is always here, always now, prior to each passing, arising, passing moment. God is the timeless now in which these moments of time kind of proceed like a procession or a parade. I think of a stream, and what is that stream bed? It's solid, it's still, it's unchanging. Incidentally, speaking of change, I'm noticing that the morning sun is working its way through the blinds. And so you're going to see the passing of time as shadows and light spots change. You could also
we'll dance through the Leela together.
Yeah. If I showed a picture of this fellow at 10 years old, you go, oh my God, that thing has changed. So life is all about change. Yet it always inheres in its true and ultimate context, which is the timeless, the changeless, open awareness, pure, sheer being or spirit. So the verbiage is paradoxical because it can point back to this, which is changeless, timeless, unborn, vaster than vast, subtler than subtlest, the true divinity. If you notice, I've used language in ways that were both affirmative and negating. And those are two great functions of sacred language, whether it's out of the mouth of holy beings or in scriptural texts, or just comes in a flash from the divine within. It can negate or render not quite as real the play of phenomena. In other words, it can deconstruct phenomena as being absolutely real. And language can affirm with superlatives and metaphors, like God is like the ocean in which all beings and worlds are mere waves or ripples. That's a metaphor. That's a way of using language metaphorically to really open up a sense of like, oh, what is this divinity, this vast reality in which all of us are like little ripples or dream figments by the divine dreamer. That's another kind of metaphor. And then one can use superlatives. I used a few phrases there. One of them is from the most ancient Upanishad, the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, where it says, the divine, the absolute reality of Brahman is subtler than the subtlest. The unseen seer of seeing, the unheard hearer of hearing, the unfelt feeler or host for feelings. Who is this silent, all-capacious, all-powerful, all-manifesting power, who is the host for all the sensory and psychic modes of experiencing? So language can be used in very powerful ways to point right to what you are, what is closer than close, the I am that am. What Meister Eckhart, real Eckhart, 700 years ago said, the uncreated aspect of the soul. That was a radical phrase he used back then, those centuries ago, because the presumption, and it was etched in stone theologically within the Orthodox Church, was that God is beyond, and we are all kind of down here. Jesus seems to have partaken of both natures, human and divine, but there was like this gulf, and Jesus was considered the bridge. Satan was the great tempter to pull you off any bridge you might try to cross. But when Meister Eckhart said there's an uncreated aspect of the soul, means that the I am that am, the divine, is your and our and everyone's true nature, their truest level of reality, their most immediate, most intimate being reality. So
there's a term that you reference, what's funny about me sharing this book, which you reference, which no one has heard about, History of Mysticism by Swami Abhayananda. It has like a handful of reviews on Amazon. I've gotten plenty of people to pick this book up. I'm obsessed with it. Is that it talks about the immanent and the transcendent, to your point. There's this presence, there's this inherent accessibility, and also it's beyond, it's ineffable, it's infinite joy, it's both and all, it's all of the above. And
East Asian logic and South Asian logic from India is what we call the four-cornered logic. So, for instance, God is being, God is not being, because the word being can just seem too glib and trite almost philosophically. Right. So they'll say God is being, God is non-being, God is both being and non-being, and God is neither being nor non-being. That's four-cornered logic. You see
is that Nagarjuna?
Nagarjuna. But the Buddha uses that four-cornered logic from time to time. And it's found in some of those ancient Vedanta works of India, the so-called Hindu tradition.
And there's a great line from Lao Tzu who says, he who knows does not speak, he who speaks does not know. And I think about that every time I say something, right?
And yet Lao Tzu, penned that Tao Te Ching, and Zhuangzi told all these long-winded, funny stories a couple of generations after him, the next great ancient contemplative Taoist sage. So, Ramana, so honored and revered for his profound spiritual silence. I'm speaking about Bhagwan Sri Ramana Maharshi, the great South Indian sage who, as we say, dropped the body in 1950. He said, "Where can I go? I am here." To those who are weeping over his imminent passing from bodily cancer, but where can I go? I am here, because he was identified as and by grace, meant by deliberate effort, he was spontaneously, freely, openly, beautifully identified as the absolute omnipresent self. And so, going to your point about transcendent and immanent, which this full allowing of the true glory of what must be this absolute divine being, surely must be beyond all, prior to all, namely pure, pristine spirit, pure being, awareness, Satchid, Ananda, bliss, as ancient Hindus spoke of. And surely this is utter transcendence. I mean, I mentioned Meister Eckhart. So many of the great mystics of the medieval era, they realized in Christendom that the Trinity doctrine can start getting a little bit too reified, thingified. And then people are trying to figure out, where are those three guys up there? God, Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Where
it's
are
confusing.
Divine persons. But the great mystics wanted to point you right back to the Godhead, to use the English transliteration of some of those Latin and vernacular terms in those European languages, and Middle Eastern, like say Eastern Orthodox churches like in Greece. So when we consider the Judeo-Christian tradition, most of the really pithy and like definitive definitions of God are very supra-personal. They're very transcendent. God is light. God is truth. God is love. God is the source of all creation. God is spirit and must be worshipped in spirit and in truth, says Jesus, in what was recorded in the John Gospel. One of the relatively few authentic aspects about the John Gospel, I think, is that mysticism of Jesus, sagely non-dual awareness. So we can't just leave it as God is utterly transcendent. I mean, the deist enlightenment thinkers, including the founders of this country, the United States of America, Jefferson and Franklin, all those folks, they were deists. And for them, God was transcendent, but also some kind of clock maker character who fashioned this creation like a mechanism and then just kind of left it. But that doesn't do justice to the immanence of the divine. And so a word came up about 150 years ago called panentheism. It means all in God, and you can conversely say all in God. It's different than pantheism, which says God is nothing more than the sum total of all phenomenal aspects. That totally denies the transcendence, the non-phenomenal, noumenal reality of God as pure, pristine spirit, vast, open, boundless, infinite awareness. So panentheism, which is also no mere theism, which tends to reify God as a someone, a somebody, a supreme being over other beings, invalidating God's profound reality as the very beingness of all beings, as Christianity's most famous Orthodox theologian Thomas Aquinas said. God must be the being that allows all beings to have their being, without whom they don't exist. So I often share with people, God, with the great Brahman, Buddha nature, Tao reality is this which is doing everything and being everyone, without whom no one or no world exists, no experience at all. Hydrogen, helium, no pre-Big Bang inflationary moment, no Big Bang cosmos event, matter, dark matter, the missing so-called dark energy that comprises most of the cosmos now, physicists have concluded to their chagrin, because they realize, oh my God, we're light years from figuring this out now. Whereas back in the early 1990s, all these physicists had the hubris to kind of be telling magazine interviewers, newspaper interviewers, and so forth that we have it all pretty much figured out. We have a theory of everything, just right around the corner. Just give us another $500,000 grant money and we'll have it all figured out in 2 years. Now their jaws are dropped. They are so confused. They realize the cosmos, just this manifest physical cosmos, is such a complete mystery. And of course, the ancient sages and psychics and shamans and shamanesses have known. You think just this physical cosmos is all there is? Subtle realms beyond subtle realms, heavens upon heavens, and so forth, multidimensional realities. So to truly honor God, the glory, the true fantastic multidimensional, multi-aspected, multimodal reality of God, we have to realize that the true divine is utterly transcendent, pure, pristine, formless spirit, unborn, unstructured, seamless reality, glorious beyond belief. And this supra-personal divine, not impersonal, but supra-personal or meta-personal, is manifesting as the gazillions of personal consciousnesses or souls throughout the cosmos. 8 billion human, trillions of animal souls or persons. That's why we shouldn't eat them. We eat plants, which are not sentient beings. They don't have a developed nervous system to feel pain and anguish and longing and sorrow. So we eat plants. That's number one rule, but God gives in the Bible, eat all the fruits and vegetables, basically, the seed-bearing plants. Later, he allows people to eat some meat after the so-called Noah's, the flood in Noah's Ark, and there's no plants around after the flood. But all those are ancient tales. We can't take them literally. But the truth is, St. Augustine is on
ahimsa.
That so many Christians are vegetarian. He himself was a meat eater, but he acknowledged that most of the early Christian movement, they went vegetarian. So think about that. Anyway.
No, that's very beautiful, Timothy. And I'm first of all, I think let me just say I'm being reflective on when to jump in, because you're so poetic. Your prose is so poetic and mystical that I could just listen to you keep sermonizing. And I want that.
Speaks through every heart and voice. So have at it.
Well, I'll just interject, just for listeners' sake, to frame this beautiful level of both compassion and intellect coming from you. I think your description of the cosmos as, I look at you as a non-dualist, as a non-dual mystic. I think hopefully that's appropriate, despite labels being unable to capture the paradox of all of that. We both revere Sri Ramana. I want to hear also about your study with Sri Nisargadatta Maharaj, because I'm aware that you actually spent time with the master of I Am That, who I'm sure listeners will love to hear. What I would love to hear more from you on is the heart-centric nature, which you discussed with Rick in other interviews, which I think he gets mischaracterized as being too heady as a Vijnani. But before we do that, to come back to this point that we're on, about the cosmos and its relationship to creator or Brahman. We have this moment actually from Adi Shankara, which I'm sure you're familiar with, this triplet that Sri Ramana comments on. Shankara says, Brahman is real. 2, the universe is unreal. And 3, Brahman is the universe. Back to the paradoxical verses. And Sri Ramana says, he did not stop at the second, because the third explains the other 2. It signifies the universe is real if perceived as the self, and unreal if perceived apart from the self.
Actually have that quote, slightly different translation at the non-dual spirituality section of the enlightened spirituality website. So, yeah, and here's, the ancient Indians, they defined what was real as this which is unborn, imperishable, changeless, prior to and beyond space-time. So that immediately renders all phenomena relatively unreal. But some people have gotten too depersonalizing and too negating with that, and then they're living this paradox, like these people that charge money for satsangs to tell you that you don't exist. I mean, it's insanity. Here's the deeper, more nuanced truth about it, which is that phenomena are not absolutely real, but are experientially real, relatively real, pragmatically real, functionally real. Shankara says world as world is unreal, but world as Brahman is real. And those ancient Upanishads have a tremendously affirmative set of linguistic phrases, along with the negating, the via negativa. They also have the via positiva. One of the 4 Mahavakyas, or great utterances from the Upanishads, is all this is Brahman.
Beautiful.
And
this tiptoes us into your article, which lovingly is just for zooming out on your work. You're a writer, you're an author, you're a professor, but you gained some notoriety, some spiritual fandom in modern American spiritual culture by writing an article that's 47 pages, because I downloaded the PDF. It's quite the tome.
Kind of straight out article. It's just a compilation.
Well, it is a masterpiece, and I've gobbled it up, and I've sent it around to a lot. I'm a modern day commentator, for what it's worth, on non-duality in spiritual gram, and so it's useful for me. And it's something that, as someone who, for example, my favorite meditation is metta, is loving kindness meditation. So I deeply honor the heart-centric, compassionate, ethical frameworks of all these spiritual paths that Neo-Advaita, as it's referred to culturally, this kind of pseudo-Advaita, as you jokingly refer to it, misses the mark. And so, feel free to take us through some of that before we get to Nisargadatta Maharaj. Maybe it's a good segue into him.
and to the real and to the true.
Well, I'd like to just take us back 2,500 years ago to the Buddha himself. He was
Sure.
the master deconstructivist, and he shows how your experience as a human being, body, mind, ego-G, as I like to endearingly term the sense of being a personal consciousness, a viewpoint on reality, because it is miraculous. How does the absolute come up with all these relative viewpoints? The Bob viewpoint, the Timothy viewpoint, your little boy, your spouse, everyone is a viewpoint. The bugs, the birds, those animals in the factory farms being put through abject horror and misery, atrocity after atrocity, day after day in their short, horrifying lives. I have to do an aside real quick. If you wanted to come up with the most satanic food system possible, the one that totally messes the environment up in about 22 ways, and habitat destruction, species extinction, climate catastrophe, wasting and polluting of all our freshwater resources, creating ocean dead zones and so forth, deforestation. The number one culprit is our food system. It's the number one killer of human beings: heart disease, cancer, diabetes, hypertension, strokes. And look what it's doing to the animals. The estimates, when you include all the little creatures in the sea, over 1 trillion, not 1 billion, not 1 million, 1 darn trillion sentient beings are suffering miserably and put to death each and every year. In the last 10 years, that's over 10 trillion because of people's unconscious, heavily brainwashed and conditioned ways of eating by big food. The meme or the common comment on many message threads about articles urging and highly recommending people to shift toward plant-based diets, if not fully into them. The meme is, oh, you vegans are always trying to foist your food and habits and views on us. Well, guess who's been foisting meat and dairy and eggs and poultry on you for the last 100 years? Big meat, big dairy, big egg. And they had things like the National Dairy Council as their front group, stuffing school classrooms with all of these slick, highly paid for materials and stuff. Your mom, grandmom, school teachers, doctors, restaurateurs, food page editors, everyone has been heavily brainwashed. So when we talk about who's foisting what on whom, get clear, get real, and then stand up and say, I'm not going to take it anymore. I'm not going to participate in that satanic system because that's what it is. It's evil. And so everyone has the capacity with their next meal, the next choice going down a supermarket aisle or farmer's market aisle to make a huge difference. And that's how we can help possibly mitigate. Don't think we can reverse, but we can certainly mitigate climate catastrophe. And again, deforestation in the Amazon and everywhere, Southeast Asia, water pollution, right? I mean, down here in the Southwest, in Arizona, the region of the dream I now call physical home, everyone's pulling their hair about the Colorado River. It supplies fresh water to about, 11 different states or something down here in the West and Southwest. Brian Richter and his team of water sustainability experts a couple of years ago proved they did more thorough work than anyone had ever tried to do. And they pointed out that 55% of all Colorado River water use is going to cattle feed for the meat and dairy industry. So in the entire Western U.S., the figure is 32% of all the freshwater sources are going to cattle feed for meat and dairy. I mean, that's precious water. In California, they're now having to look at building a whole bunch of desalination plants. That money could be going for other purposes, high-speed rail, creating new towns and areas for homeless to live in and so forth. But it has to go for fresh water. Why? Because people's eating habits, that burger, that ham, that chicken, so forth. It's all that dairy. And now that it's so easy to go plant-based, to go vegan. When I was I went that back in 1974 with the help of my late sister, who passed away just a few months later in Hawaii. She turned me on to plant-based eating. And, back then there was very little meat or dairy substitute to be able to find. You really had to scrounge and eat more traditionally, like just beans and rice and so forth. We didn't have quinoa. We didn't have, 9 different kinds of dairy alternatives from milk or yogurt or cheese, like Miyoko's cheese and butter. Fantastic replacements and so much better for the planet, so much better for your health, your family's health. Study after study is coming out. One just came out last year, a Scandinavian team, that even if you go whole food plant-based in your 60s, you'll add an extra 6, 7, 8 years of life. If you switch in your 80s, the statistics show you will add 3 or 4 years of longevity. Those are years you could be spending in lovely service to community, getting clearer about waking up to God, so that the next kind of embodiment, whether it's in the subtle realms or on earth, can be a freer and clearer one. It opens up your arteries too when you change your diet. You'll think more clearly. You'll feel more fully because your system isn't all clogged and dazed. And they're tracing dementia, Alzheimer's, to animal products, which are inflammatory. These bodies evolved from ancient primate herbivores, 98 to 100% herbivores. So eating all that meat and dairy, it's like a big cat diet out on the African savannah. But we didn't descend from lions and cheetahs and hyenas. We descended from primates. So be good to the body, be good to it, and be good to the.
And this very passionate, well-researched side note is a perfect example of your capacity to harmonize the inner work with the outer work, with what you call in your website and in your writings, engaged spirituality.
Yeah.
And you've teased a manuscript that I'm hoping surfaces, which is called Healing Our World, Crucial Solutions for Urgent Problems.
I've got the whole front introduction to it available for free on the internet. That was a project that I just basically went through and started identifying all the massive, dire, pressing problems on the planet and showing how there's easy solutions to all of them, really. But things like Yes Magazine came along and other publications and writers, and they started proffering the solutions. And I realized, I only have so much time allotted for this life, and there's other projects that need to be dealt with. So I've bitten off of some really massive projects that, if the good Lord wants these things to show up in form, they'll happen. This body could be dead tonight with a brain embolism or fall off a cliff or something on a hiking trail in the next week. So I'm not attached at all to any of this. It's all divine grace and just trying to allow this body, mind, ego G instrument to be an instrument, just as you've allowed. Like your book, Original Sin is a Lie. That speaks so perfectly to the fact that the divine nature, all purity, all goodness, all innocence, the I am that am is everyone's true self. It's like closer than your eyeballs. Before you can have any thoughts about spirituality and whether you're worthy or unworthy, before any of that, prior to that, so intimate and immediate, no mediation, no intermediary. God is your truth, and God is all innocence. God is your original being and sinless. Original innocence. It's Matthew Fox, I think, was the one that penned that phrase. But it goes back, the same idea. So many of the great mystics felt like divine purity is always already here. We just have to relax, let go, let God, allow calmness, allow the sense of flow, trust, the profound faith that God or the Buddha nature, the great Tao, the Brahman reality, the Atman self is here now. Your real truth, everyone's real truth, the one playing this incredible dream, this amazing lila, divine play or sport, kruda, game in Sanskrit, of pretending to be a viewpoint that's limited, lonely, bereft, deficient, sinful, in the sense of being obviously imperfect, virtue, and not always the best relative to your relatives or best friend to your friends. If one is honest and conscientious, not a sociopath, but actually has developed a conscience, you'll realize that this whole body, mind, ego is quite flawed. And so there can be a sense of like heavy sin. And God, I must be carrying sins from past lives. People that open up to past life memories feel like, I really blew it in a lot of those lifetimes. I was not a good human being, might be the perception that arises. Let alone whatever we've been in interdimensional spaces and subtle realms. So people can have a tremendous sense of shame and guilt, and just like taking on like, oh my God, maybe I was one of those slave owners back, in 1850 in Alabama or someplace, or South Carolina, and making African American peoples brought over in slavery and making their lives miserable. I mean, one takes on the sinfulness of all of that. Maybe I was a Nazi gunning down people in the shtetl in Poland or something. So it's easy for a sense of original sin to seem real, and especially for me. But this is where the deep, penetrating wisdom and all-embracing compassion allows the fogs and mists of toxins to just evaporate. And there's realization, divine purity is always here. I started to talk about the Buddha. The Buddha identified the aspects of personhood as body, whether a physical body or a subtle realm body, like in between physical lifetimes or at night when you're dreaming, you're usually associated with some kind of dream perspective, dream viewpoint, some kind of dream body, because the body sense can arise and feel vulnerable in a dream, like falling dreams and that kind of thing. Monsters come and threaten your what? Your dream form, your dream body. Somehow there's an identification with some kind of locale and entity quality. So that's the subtle plane sense of body. So the Buddha called the sense of body, physical or subtle, rupa. This is the first of what he calls the 5 aggregates of personhood. The second aggregate, or khanda in ancient Pali, skanda in Buddhist Sanskrit, which arose a few generations later. The second aggregate is sensations. That's all the possible, like say for the physical body, kinesthetic sensations, tactile sensations of touch, sight, hearing of sounds, smell, taste, the so-called 5 senses. And we actually know that humans have a little bit of magnetite in their brains, like birds. We can actually sense magnetic north if we really attune and so forth. Remote viewing, how is that happening? It's not happening with eyeballs, but it's a proven fact that remote viewing is real. Rupert Sheldrake in England showed that dogs have this in spades. They always know when their owner's coming home. They immediately begin to orient because they know miles away or tens or dozens of miles away, their owner is coming back and they see them psychically. So there are all these sensations happening relative to this body that experiences them, or the subtle body, like in remote viewing or in dreams. It's like, how are you having sensations in dreams? How do you see anything in a dream? What's the source of light? The sun? There's no sun in the dream. Lamplight? There's no lamps in the dream necessarily. You see by the light of consciousness, but how is any kind of seeing possible? So sensations are happening on the basis of some kind of physical or subtle plane body, rupa. And then the third aggregate of personhood is making sense out of these sensations, what we call perceptions. Otherwise, and we know in certain mental asylums, there have been cases of beings that did not have perception working for them, and they were just assaulted by sensations moment by moment. I mean, at any given millisecond, you actually have countless, not thousands, but probably millions of different kinds of sensations. Think of all the different aspects of your body where you could be paying attention to kinesthetic inner touch sensations, or like the sensation of the air against your face, cool or warm, or the sensations under your bottom if you're sitting on a chair or seat or sofa or something. So the skin against your body, think of all the points on the body where skin is touching. So just on the level of that kind of touch, and inner touch, kinesthesia, there's a tremendous number of sensations. Look at your visual world, all the colors, textures, forms, lines, curves, everything. The sounds.
A great deconstructor.
Yeah. So, and then perception is not just making sense of sensations, but short-term, medium-term, long-term memory. How does that function? Really knows. And the capacity for language to express or comprehend language. It's a miracle. Bhartrhari, a very ancient Advaita or nondual Indian philosopher, grammarian, he was astonished that language happens at all. He was convinced it was a non-dual flash of intuitive one mind kind of hosting two minds, the divine mind hosting, say, Bob and Timothy, being able to comprehend each other. And so all these perceptions, plans for a future, being able to conceive a future, along with remembering short-term, medium-term, long-term memories of the past, all of this level of perception is amazing. And then there's how we emotionally respond to or react to how we perceive the meaning of perceptions. And so people get angry or elated or sad. They feel lonely. They feel excited. So many different possible kinds of emotional states. And then in the ancient Buddhist Pali and Sanskrit, this term samskara, it's a very important, crucial word psychospiritually in ancient India for these different traditions, Jain, Hindu, Buddhist. Samskara is also not just your emotional responses, but also your volitional impulses and personal consciousness tendencies. Some people tend toward hatred and animosity or competition. Other people tend toward yielding, understanding, empathetic qualities of flowing with their fellow beings. Some people have short tempers, hot tempers. Some people are very even-minded and so forth. Some people are very creative. Others not so, apparently. Some are kind of cool, aloof. Others are very warm and friendly and juicy in their sense of emotional and interpersonal connectivity with fellow beings. So these are the samskaras, wholesome or unwholesome. Wholesome samskaras, like great musical talents, great capacity to be a great friend to your friend, so forth. All sorts of different talents and wholesome qualities, the virtues. These are the highest of the beautiful, wholesome samskaras. The Buddha teaches us loving kindness, deep empathetic compassion, sympathetic joy with fellow beings that might be in states of happiness, so you don't get envious or jealous, equanimity. These great virtues, those are just the four divine abodes, as he calls them. And he invites people to radiate out those qualities to everyone, near and far, high and low. These qualities are the most beautiful samskaras. And then the Buddha identifies as the fifth aggregate of personhood, the personal consciousness sense itself, the vijnana, that sense of being a viewpoint, the one who is having all these emotions, these samskaras, including the volitional impulses, the one who's having all these perceptions, the one having all these sensations, the one having this association with a body. So the Buddha calls that fifth khanda or skanda, this fifth aggregate of personhood, the vijnana, the personal consciousness. Now, he repeatedly, throughout the pages of the authentic early Buddhist sutta literature, sutra in Sanskrit, that word, he teaches his listeners how to identify these five aggregates of personhood, including the very sense of being a personal consciousness, a me, a being, among other beings, and to disidentify. There's a famous phrase, few Buddhists seem to have really noticed it, but if you just sit down and read through, like the Digha Nikaya and the Majjhima Nikaya, the biggest collections of wisdom from the Buddha himself, and we now know that is highly accurate because he presented it in ways that were very easily remembered. He gives these mnemonic devices like the 3 poisons and the 7 enlightenment factors and the 4 noble truths and the 8-fold path to realizing the highest truth and so forth. So scholars are quite clear, the ones that have really gotten in there, the Pali language experts and experts on the very earliest generations of Buddhism, they know that we have a more accurate collection of teachings and a massive collection of teachings from the Buddha than any other ancient historical figure. You know, with Jesus, we know so much stuff was put in his mouth for religious, political purposes, vis-a-vis starting to hate the Jews and love the Romans and make Christianity and Jesus seem much more favorable to the Romans. So all of this garbage was put in Jesus' mouth and everything, and trying to get to the actual core, the essential, authentic sayings of Jesus has been much more difficult for scholars. And
the Buddha had a longer teaching career. The Buddha had a few more decades,
35 years if you afford with the biographical sources. But here's the thing. The Buddha says his most common refrain throughout all that sutta literature is regarding these 5 aggregates, these phenomenal aspects and functional aspects of personhood, these 5 khandas, the pancha khandas, or 5 aggregates. He says, Netam mama, neso hamasmi na me sawata. Netam mama, these are not mine. Neso hamami, this is not who I am. And the last phrase translates as, this is not myself. He never says, contrary to so many Buddhists, ministers, monks, nuns, professors that have misinterpreted the Buddha's teachings of anatta, non-self. It doesn't mean no self. The Buddha never says, you don't exist. You're not a person. There is no person. There is no self. But it doesn't say that. He says these aggregates of personhood or relative functional self are not who you really are. They are not your true self. That's what he says very clearly. And 70-80% of writers on Buddhism and professors, and I've met many monks and nuns, laypersons that should know better. They should know better, but they've been misled. And unfortunately, there was a Buddhist monk who was already misleading people in the next generation after the Buddha in this work called The Questions of King Milinda. He comes to a monk named Nagasena, and Nagasena speaks about the 5 aggregates of personhood and then says, it's just like a cart. There's wheels and an axle and a seat and maybe a harness to the animal pulling. But the cart doesn't really exist. That's just an idea. It's only the parts. And let's just deconstruct everything. And King Milinda goes, oh, okay, there's no personhood. There's, just the some aggregates of personhood, but really it doesn't exist. And some of the best Buddhist scholars of the last generation and two, like Alex Wayman and others, said, that's ridiculous. We need carts. We need to move goods around. We need to move people around. There's a functional cart, just like there is a functional self or person comprised of, as the Buddha himself pointed out, these 5 aggregates of personhood. Some kind of body you're associated with, the rupa, the sensations, vedana, the perceptions, sanya, and then the samskaras, these emotions and volitional impulses and so forth, motivations, and then the sense of personhood itself, the vijnana. Now, the Buddha points out that there's this anidasana vijnana, the seamless, structureless consciousness. And this is where we could speak about Nisargadatta, if you like, because he was always pointing people. He wanted you to acknowledge all the aspects of personhood, like the Buddha did. And then he wants you to step back, recede back, he would say, recede back from that sense of personhood, or what he calls, and think of small case letters, beingness, I amness, in the sense of I am a separate personal self, or consciousness, small case C, a distinct personal consciousness, what I call a viewpoint. Maharaj was always saying, recede back into universal consciousness. And then he said, by the grace of the Absolute that dreams up the whole play of the cosmos through the universal consciousness, you will be awakened as and established as the Absolute awareness. And this is what the Buddha was sharing. He speaks of the unborn, the unconditioned, the unmade, without which there would be no liberation from this which is conditioned, born, and made. That, oh, listeners, oh, almsmen and almswomen, and laity, there is this unborn, uncompounded, unmade reality, the Absolute. Pure nirvana means release from the fire of agitating, selfish samskaras.
I'm thrilled that you touched on the confusion. Let's call it what it is. The confusion around anatta and atman, which has been debated by Indian philosophers for, 2,300 years. And I just had a friend of mine text me, last week that said, wait, is there no soul in Buddhism? And I said, how much time do you have for me to talk about this and explain this? So I'm thrilled that you brought this up and clarifying that it's closer to non-self, not quite no self. And really what you said about the fifth, the vijnana,
fifth aggregate,
the fifth aggregate, as being in direct contradiction to a later misinterpretation around lack of an individual self. What I have explained before, and let's just touch on this briefly before we get on to Nisargadatta, because I want to actually ask you about the tangible, how you showed up over there, and some of the stories of getting to know him. But before we do that, what I've explained, and kind of correct me if I'm wrong or add to it, which is what the Buddha did extremely well, and I think what Jesus did extremely well, and really what the masters, men and women throughout history who have broken the veil, do, is they correct and reform the wooden tradition of their day, right? So the Buddha is constantly being called out by other Hindus, by other, Vedic teachers who are saying, there's essentially, they were too concerned with karmic kind of recipes and rituals, right? And
exactly.
And basically what he's saying is you're getting caught up in this. There's a great moment in where a Vedic priest is lighting a fire, and there's a lot of concern around fire ritual and so on in ancient India, right? And the Buddha says, the fire is lust, the fire is anger. Worry about that one.
Exactly. Beautifully put, really beautifully put. He was always reframing and pointing at deeper, truer reality and context for how to then be associated with these aggregates of personhood in ways that were, again, full of metta, karuna, mudita, upekkha, those four divine abodes, the chatur brahma vihara of loving kindness, profoundly empathetic compassion, that deep, deep empathetic, sympathetic joy, and equanimity, that equipoise, that sense of no matter how ferocious some of the life conditions can be, no matter how abject the suffering of different kinds of pain, physical pain, emotional pain, there can be this deep, deep equipoise or equanimity because one has realized one's true identity as the unborn, the Buddha nature, as it would soon be called. And incidentally, that whole thing again about non-self, realizing all the aspects of personhood are not who I truly am and not mine. The Buddha invariably in that Digha Nikaya collection of suttas, hundreds of them, and same with the Majjhima Nikaya and even thicker work. I say do this to kind of point the width of a Western modern era style book. They didn't have those back then. It was an oral tradition. But like the Majjhima Nikaya in English translation is about that thick. I'm holding my fingers, I don't know if you can tell, about 3.5, 4 inches apart. Digha Nikaya is about 2 inches thick, that volume. And when you go through that, you see that the Buddha, the master deconstructivist, showing that whatever arises is just phenomena, and they are anicca, not permanent. They're passing, they're evanescent. Just like, where is your 2-year-old self or your 22-year-old self? Where is your experience from an hour ago or 3 seconds ago? Everything is passing. If we try to hold on to a moment, say 7 seconds from now, it's coming, Bob. 6, 5. Well, we're going to try and hold on to it. 4, 3. We're going to make it solid. Up, here it is. It's already gone. So the Buddha is showing everything is impermanent, therefore insubstantial. It doesn't have its own inherent reality. It's dreamlike. It's like a dewdrop. He has all these metaphors. Nagarjuna later would repeat the same list and add a few, like a mirage and so forth. A magician's trick, a juggler's sleight of hand, this kind of thing. And therefore, because everything is impermanent, insubstantial like a dream, it's not worth clinging to for your deepest fulfillment or satisfaction. And so the word dukkha means not so much suffering, although it's certainly that for many countless beings. It means the dissatisfactoriness, the inherent dissatisfactoriness of all phenomena, any phenomenon, for your absolute well-being. The only absolute well-being is waking up from the dream of me with all these attachments and aversions, the delusions that fuel all of it, the 3 poisons: delusion, attachment, aversion. Attachment meaning the unwholesome, unhealthy attachments. You can be very healthily attached to the well-being of your family, friends, community, nation, planet, the planetary ecosystems, the fellow beings we share the planet with, the animal, the non-human animal persons. So those are healthy attachments, just like there's kind of healthy or reasonable aversions, like fearing the rise of fascism, whether you're in early 1930s Germany or year 2024 in the United States. And so
well, and there's a great Buddhist writer, contemporary. Oh, sorry, Timothy. There's a great Buddhist contemporary writer, Haemin Sunim, who's a Buddhist monk in South Korea, who I saw a great lecture with him at Google, and he was asked by an engineer who is, it's a secular crowd in tech, of course, and he said something essentially like, "This is all good and well, but." Essentially what he asked is aren't the difficulties of life what brings about new advancements? Aren't basically what this guy asks this monk is he says, that's fine that you're a Buddhist monk, but if everyone was a Buddhist monk, nothing would happen. We would just be this stagnant civilization. And, he laughs. He's a sweet guy. And, he basically says, I've never been busier in my life. He created a school, he's written books, he's constantly teaching. There's this misconception that despite the temporal transitory nature of material phenomena and our, detachment from it. Detachment's a tough word, right? Because it implies apathy or indifference and so on. And he essentially says, no, when you come up into your heart, when you have that, to use your term, engaged spirituality, you have this, you become an engine of compassion.
Right. I mean, as I pointed out to that interviewer, Arnie Cooper, for the Sun magazine, national publication on psychology and culture and a certain amount of spirituality, the Sun magazine, back in the interview was in late '02, and it was published, I think, in spring of '03. I reproduced the whole thing up at the website. Anyway,
Enlightenedspirituality.org. Check it out.
yeah, there's a hyphen between enlightened and spirituality.org. That was back before we knew you could do run-on words and didn't need to use spaces or hyphens or anything. But anyhow, I kept that domain. So I told Arnie, mystical spirituality is about really realizing the true I, waking up to one's unborn original identity, which is God. God is dreaming us. God is being us. So to awaken to this fact, this reality, doing everything and being everyone, immediate, not off somewhere, not remote, not distant, but the very heart of your heart, the life of your lives, the self of yourself, capital S self, of your personal individual viewpoint, 5 aggregate personhood, selfhood. So mystical spirituality is awakening to this vast, boundless, purely spiritual eye, the open, infinite awareness. And engaged spirituality is realizing this I that is we, the collective of viewpoints of persons, human, animal, discarnate, beyond the physical body beings, and being just so totally in love with all these beings because the divine nature is love. And that's, again, we see with the Buddha. I'll go back to him. He's such an incredible spiritual hero and genius and innovator in so many ways. Yes, there were the more ancient Upanishad sages, but the Buddha apparently didn't know about them. None of the language about Brahman and the true Atman as non-phenomenal ever shows up in any of the dialogues. None of his Hindu interlocutors, the Vedic priests and others and yogis, his own soon-to-be disciples, followers, none of them know this language. And the Buddha doesn't use those terms either. Like Brahman or anything. That was unknown. It was still a secret forest tradition. So those ancient Upanishadic geniuses were kind of still in the forest, I guess, though, by the Buddha's time even. But the Buddha, with his own native innate genius, it was dawning more and more profoundly. And then, boom, with that night of enlightenment, full awakening, and thereafter the teaching career for 35 years. He's always teaching this deconstruction through this penetrating wisdom, but immediately affirming for his followers these virtues of loving kindness, empathetic compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity. So he's living this balance of wisdom deconstructs everything as just a dream. And all this compassion and love and empathy is affirming, wow, what a dream. Wow, what an amazing play of all the beings and all the worlds, and how we can let go, disidentify, detach, and thereby be more available to serve, to help. All the sharing and caring and loving happens spontaneously, free of egotism. Free of, the kind of pride of, oh, look how well I serve, or, boy, I wish my wife knew how loving I was. I really think I love her more than she loves me. All the kind of ways in which egotism contaminates loving and giving and serving and sharing. Becomes toxic, actually, because it just keeps reinforcing that tighter, more contracted sense of me, myself, and mine. So the Buddha invites us to have that all just dissolve, wake up from the me dream to the one who's really here, the absolute divine reality, the Buddha nature. Let
me jump in here. Let me jump in here with the greatest segue I could ever dream of as an interviewer, which is, potentially his most famous quote, which maybe you feel free to correct if there's a variation, but Nisargadatta Maharaj says, of course, wisdom is knowing I am nothing, love is knowing I am everything, and between the two, my life moves.
Yeah, I was so struck when I first read that in 1978. And then immediately wanted to go over and see Maharaj. And it took about a year and a half to get to first Burma, Myanmar, ordained temporarily, as many young and middle-aged Buddhists in Burma do, as a bhikkhu, almsman, monk, along with several guys that joined me. We were over there and able to even go into Upper Burma out of the town of Rangoon, where you were limited by a 3-day visa. Rina Sirkar, this beautiful 10 precepts Burmese nun who taught at my alma mater, Cal Institute of Integral Studies in San Francisco. She got several of her female students who lived in the household with her and invited a few of her Pali students, including these 4 gents, roughly my age, a little older, some of them. And we all went off to Burma and ordained under this amazing, amazing master up in North Burma called Tongpulu Sayadaw, the great sagely perfected one, Arhat or Sayadaw of Burma, from the little tiny boonies town of Tongpulu. So from there, I went on to India. I used my dear Buddhist friends as a vehicle to get over there to India, because I knew, wow, I'll be able to go and experience really original, primitive life as a Buddhist monk way up the boonies of Upper Burma. There's like no electricity most of the time and so forth, and do the alms rounds. But I wanted to get to India because Nisargadatta, I knew by that point, had throat cancer in fall of 1980. He would drop the body in September of 1981. I got there in early January of 81. And he was... had this slashing energy about him, that deconstructive, annihilating wisdom. And he had this totally affirmative love side to him that was just awesome. And I got to experience that. You'd experience it most people did not. They only experienced his talks. But if you went to those bhajan songs and the litany of prayers and hymns and so forth that came from that lineage of his, which actually went back all the way to the Varkari movement founded by this great sage Gyaneshwar, the young child prodigy sage who founded India's first caste-free, non-misogynist, non-sexist, nondual bhakti devotion movement, the Varkaris. So Maharaj loved Gyaneshwar and all those saints following Gyaneshwar, these non-dual devotional saints like Eknath and Namdev and Tukaram, and the women saints like Janabai and others. So I saw Maharaj as being this being who was evaporating your dreams so you could simply be awake. And then he knew that spontaneously, by the grace of our transcendent nature, spontaneously would be involved in engaged spirituality. And so he'd sometimes sum up his way as clarity and charity. But the charity happens out of this ego-free mode, not this contracted, oh, look, what a do-gooder I am. And that's why if you read some of the dialogue exchanges with him, especially that first one, the big I Am That collection by his friend, disciple, colleague, if you will, Maurice Friedman, who was a tremendous hero. Yeah, if you read about Maurice, he was an amazing guy, helping Jewish refugees from Nazi horror, and later was in North India helping the Tibetans, emigrate out of the Red Guards, pogroms, and massacres up there in Tibet. He was a freedom fighter. He was a student of J. Krishnamurti. He came to Ramana Maharshi and put together the Gospel of Sri Ramana, which is one of the pithy, best collections of Ramana's teachings one could imagine. And then he wound up...
I'm glad you brought up Maurice Friedman because
Yeah.
He's fairly unknown, I think, in contemporary spirituality, and I found about him through David Godman, who's one of
Yes.
the
Mm,
librarians at the Urban.
sure. And that's David's real name, God man. What an auspicious name.
Right.
Uh,
Glitch in the
uh,
Matrix.
yeah. So, Maurice was a helper. He was a servant of humanity selflessly. He was involved in so many beautiful causes of justice against injustice. And some of those dialogues in the I Am That collection, which those of us back in the late 70s, few of us that got it here in the US, it was a 2-volume hardback thing. Now you can get a single paperback cover. And of course, people have pirated and put it up for free, the entire book on the internet places you can read it. But a lot of the questions in there are kind of incredulous that Maharaj can seem to be negating the importance of work within this world and service work and combating injustices. It's not true. Maharaj only wanted people to be divested of, free of the sense of the me, the doer. And in a few places in the I Am That collection, but more explicitly, pithily, in a collection called The Ultimate Medicine, it came out several years later. A young naturopath from Northern California was visiting Maharaj just about 6 months before I got there. So he was there in summer of 1980. And Maharaj begins to speak about the vital power, this shapeless, formless, textureless, structureless power. The Sanskrit words would be prana, the ancient Upanishadic term for the vital power. You could also think of this later Hindu word Shakti. So this prana Shakti, this vital power, is the divine, Maharaj says. So this is the God of your world. Without this vital power, you don't exist. You can't move. You can't feel. You can't think. You can't do anything. Nothing exists without this vital power. So he said, get acquainted with this intuitively, because it's formless, colorless. You can't grab it. You can't see this. You can't hear it. But this is what's allowing your seeing and hearing and grabbing and touching and moving and thinking and functioning. So get acquainted with this intuitively. It's a knowing by being. It's a knowing by being, not an objective knowing, but a knowing by being this. He says, you meditate on this, you be this, because this is what is being you and all the worlds. So this vital power meditation is profound. It's especially good for householders, anyone in active domains of service and high tech, or raising a family, teaching school kids, driving a truck. You can't just zone out and go, what is my true nature beyond all body, beyond mind? I am the no thing. I am the absolute. I am bodiless, mindless. You can't use that approach. And Maharaj says there are these twin ways to come home to who you are. One is meditating on the personal consciousness, the so-called beingness, or consciousness with a small case, B or C. Recede back, detach, transcend, allow the grace of the absolute for the universal consciousness to expand you transpersonally into the universal consciousness. And then what I would say, wake you up supra-personally to the absolute, the Brahman reality. But Maharaj said there's this other way. Just meditate on the vital power. It's doing your whole life anyway. It'll feel absolutely non-dual that you are not the doer. This great power has been doing your entire life, all your lifetimes. The association of the consciousness or soul with the body or the subtle body in dreams, the way it moves back and forth and between lifetimes. What is orchestrating all this? It's this vital power. So Maharaj says, meditating on this, you'll stay functional, vital, because of the vital power, not because of you.
And that's a beautiful
takes over.
That's a beautiful practical method for the modern human because, I think, and just alluding to the yogas, typically my audience, Timothy, folks who are reading my book come from Christian backgrounds. They're kind of
Sure.
ex-evangelical. And so what I'm doing is sometimes what I say is I'm offering you a plate at the spiritual buffet line. Grab some noodles, grab some tiramisu. You don't have to just eat hamburgers. There's take
She'll
what
kill
you
you.
which will kill you anyway. Right.
Yeah.
Nisargadatta is considered a master of yana yoga, just kind of for the more basic
Wisdom way.
wisdom way, as is Ramana Maharshi and so many other kind of contemplative non-dual masters. But what you reminded me there, and kind of he's making really kind of two different almost offerings within a yana context potentially. Whereas what I'd love to talk about too with you, if we have time, is I'm obsessed with Women of Power and Grace. I think it's absolutely fantastic. I've recommended it to so many people, and deep, deep bow for your work in highlighting the female mystics, because the males we hear about and know about, and they're wonderful, not to take away from their attainments and so on. But let's megaphone the females, and you do this so wonderfully in Women of Power and Grace. And
If I
Ananda
could
my mom.
interject, if I could
Please.
interject, I mean, there's not many copies of that book left in print. So, I mean, people have it. So it's in print out there, but in terms of being able to buy, and I know some people on the internet are marking up used copies horribly. I still have a relative few left, but here's the thing. That book was kind of a more publishable fruit of a much bigger project I'd been doing research for. As soon as I finished grad school, I started researching all the great women luminaries, East and West, North, South, all the religions, ancient times up to say around 1992, when I kind of had to stop the research for that. So I created this huge project called Women of Spirit. It would have been a huge reference book, like 1,400 pages or something. And then I realized, it's just only a few thousand copies will get printed. It'll be sitting collecting dust in a lot of libraries. It's too unwieldy to put out as a mass market paperback or something. So I just came up with 9 women of the modern era, going back to Francesca Cabrini, the great Italian immigrant saint in the United States. She founded all these hospitals and orphanages and schools and things. In fact, there's a
First American saint.
Yeah, first canonized American citizen. Elizabeth Seton had been a Catholic woman or canonized as a saint some generations before, but she was not an American citizen. She's from England. So there's actually a biopic, apparently some very good production values coming out on Mother Cabrini. There's also a lovely documentary a filmmaker made about her a few years ago you can find maybe through Interlibrary loan. But just to say that that Women of Power and Grace book, the subtitle is 9 Astonishing, Inspiring Luminaries of Our Time. There's only 9. But if you go online to the website, finally, in year 2017, about 25 years after I did all the original research for it, you'll find that big, like, whatever it is, 1,400 page equivalent, Women of Spirit. And what's the subtitle? It's like Saints, Teachers, Healers, Sisterhoods, and Goddesses, East and West. And it just, there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of women and different kind of goddess archetypes also, dozens identified. And that's, you can read through that for free. Plus I have the equivalent, I think it's about a 60 or 80 page introduction that touches on a whole number of interesting topics. Like say that ancient metristic period that turned into the patriarchy and the sins of misogyny and sexism and so forth. Yeah, you've got it there, the introduction to it. So anyway,
Thank you for offering this. It's
freely immerse themselves in that if they wish. And I would say that the contents of the book, Women of Power and Grace, they were elaborated, and so certainly in terms of the teachings and some of the biographical material. But you'll get, maybe about half that Women of Power and Grace book is available within that Women of Spirit collection. And you'll meet a whole lot of other amazing women, East and West.
In every tradition.
So I felt that, as a male, I had to do that to atone for the sins of all the big tribes and historians that left out her story when they wrote his story. That's kind of the why I embarked on that.
Well, yeah, give us a tease of some of your favorites. I know it's impossible, but, for example, Anandamayi Ma is referenced in Autobiography of a Yogi, which is, one of the most read spiritual classics in the last 100 years, as it should be, as you see. Me being a devotee here, Yogananda smiling upon us.
Yogananda, an amazing being.
Right.
Amazing.
Right. And he visited the great mother, who referred to herself as this body or little girl.
Your daughter, she would often.
Your daughter. What's so profound to me about these female mystics of all these traditions is their absolute egolessness.
I think for a lot of folks, we can also nuance this a little further and speak of just being unselfish. I used to use the word like selfless. I use that a lot of my writings, older writings, you'll probably find that word selfless in there. But again, being true to the Buddha and his sense of anatta, let's not imply with words like selfless that someone literally had no functional ego happening. No, there is a viewpoint there. It's just, it was so opened up, so relaxed, so non-grasping, so non-petty, so allowing of massive currents of divine love and light and bliss and goodness to come through, profound virtues to express. Let's just say they were unselfish, but they were full of the divine self, which was just manifesting in all glory as far as can be manifested through a human frame, human body, mind, ego-g. I use this term ego-g. It's a wonderful contribution from an old Danish mystic named Emanuel Sorensen, who was known as Shunyata. It's a long story, and I've told it some places. Some friends of mine, Betty Kamhi and Elliot Eisenberg, put together a few books about Shunyata. He was this gentle, androgynous-looking, delicate features, beautiful powder blue, brilliant eyes. He worked as a gardener in a state down in London, or a London suburb, and Rabindranath Tagore, the famous Indian playwright and poet, Renaissance man, he saw Shunya, Emanuel Sorensen was his name, in this garden and began to chat with him and realized, oh my God, this Danish man that's working here in England, he's a full-blown mystic. And he invited him back to India, where he introduced him to all the top people in the Congress Party, Nehru's daughter, King Indira Gandhi, the prime minister, Mahatma Gandhi. Shunyata went off and met Sri Ramana Maharshi, and Ramana called him a natural-born mystic. And he was an amazing being. And I was once sitting with Shunya after I came back from the first India trip from 1981 in the late spring. I was sitting at a friend's home. He was cooking up lovely dinner for Shunya and myself. He wanted us to meet. Shunyata had been brought over by the Alan Watts Society in his late 80s, and up until he was hit by a car in his mid-90s on his morning walk, accidentally, he was sharing lovely satsangs. But I had not gone out there yet to see him. I'd just come back from India. So my buddy wanted us to meet. So we're sitting in his living room, very Zen-like living room. My friend Thomas Burns, this amazing Sufi-style poet. He's cooking up all the food in the kitchen while Shunya and I are sitting on the sofa. And Shunya wanted to know about my meetings with Sri Nisargadatta, whom he had learned about. And I was sharing with him, and at one point I just mentioned still some arising ego tendencies. And this one he goes, oh, ego, G. And I realized, and see, if you're not familiar, G is that little suffix in India they'll use as a term of endearment and even honor and reverence, like Babaji or Swamiji or Guruji. So when he said ego, G, I suddenly realized, of course, he's just reframing all of this suprapersonal divinity manifesting as each and every person, miraculous manifestation of personhood, the personal consciousness or soul or jiva. This is a miraculous play of where the one appears and very vividly seems to be this self and this self and this self and gazillions of selves throughout the cosmos. Not just the 8 billion humans and trillions of animals, but all these countless ancestors and spirit guides and nature spirits and beings on other dimensions and worlds and other kinds of civilizations. And Shinya said, Hikoji. And I realized we need not fall into that thing that happens so commonly in spiritual circles, East and West, where we berate and mock and denigrate the functional self, which granted, it's often dysfunctional with greed, hatred, delusion, jealousy and everything, nastiness, pettiness. But those flaws are really not that deep, those of us mystics feel. God is the deep one, and profound inner purity and goodness is our true nature, just at the level of pure emanations out of the heart of God and our original soul nature, utterly pure. And so there's this notion, I use this phrase, cellular evolution, just like there's been biological evolution of cells and organisms, like ours, dozens of organ systems and trillions of cells in a single human body. In that play of biological cellular evolution, the last 4 billion years. So also, and who knows how far it goes back in subtle realms, eons, there's a cellular evolution where the personal consciousnesses are being purified. They're evolving. What are they evolving in? Not so much structures like cellular evolution. They're evolving in virtue, in divine qualities and capacities. And so in the Chan and Zen Buddhist tradition, they speak, there's a wonderful little phrase, it's especially used in Chinese and Korean Chan and Song Buddhism. You don't hear it quite as much in the Japanese Zen traditions, but it's there among some of the teachers. And it's this: let there be sudden awakening and gradual cultivation. And to unpack that a little more, sudden awakening to our immediate, formless, always closer than close, right here, closer than your eyeballs, Buddha nature, Brahman, Atman, reality, self, open awareness, nature, true identity. Let there be intuitive, direct awakening to this which is always here, the unborn Buddha nature. And let there be the gradual cultivation at the level of those all-important personhood aggregates, the sense of me, the samskaras, the perceptions, those 3 higher aggregates of personhood. Let these be evolving. Let them be getting purified. Let them be more and more skilled in virtue and goodness and the various capacities. And so the Chan and
that's a really important couplet. I just wanted to interject on that. That's a really important couplet because I feel like, sometimes I have the tendency to say, oh, well, Sri Ramana had the spontaneous samadhi that was pervasive throughout his lifetime, or, there's no shortage of well, I guess there is a shortage, but it's not that uncommon for the instant enlightened incarnation. Whereas for me, I say, oh, it's been more gradual for me. it's been more of an excavation. At one point I'm in the Cenozoic, and then I come back up, and then I'm in the Jurassic, and then I come, it's this gradual process for me.
That's clever.
Thank you. Whereas what you're saying rings true in that, on some level, this kind of making a big division between a Ramana and myself in some capacity almost could at its worst be like a religious fundamentalist Christian or something like this. Say, oh well, I'm not Jesus. Jesus is one with God, but not me. But I think what this couplet reminds us is that it's both. There's this always now timeless, ineffable state of purity and innocence and love that transcends, and it's immediately accessible in this moment, right? The Jewish phrase, if not now, when, right? But at the same time, it's still something that is cultivated throughout Maya.
And that Chan and Son tradition, China and Korea, now maintained in the South Korean Son tradition, stamped out in North Korea. Anyway, there's a sense of awakening to original unborn Buddha nature and then letting it be actualized as a living Buddha, someone who actually lives the qualities of an enlightened Buddha. And so I think even the Buddha and all the Buddhas cosmically and before and after the time of the Buddha himself, he said that there would be Buddhas after him and there were before him. I think even they are, it's almost blasphemy to say it, but I think as souls, as functional viewpoints on reality, they are also evolving to even more spectacular, just incredibly cosmic kinds of forms of Buddhahood in terms of the functional, interrelational, manifesting qualities. Some of the descriptions in the Avatamsaka Sutra, which is a very important early Mahayana Buddhist work from around 600-700 years after the Buddha. It's a tale of a young disciple of the Buddha who goes in search of deeper realization and meets all these amazing bodhisattvas and the Buddha. And it winds up, so much of that work is just the most mind-blowing use of language to describe the most fantastic Buddha realms and Buddhas and bodhisattvas. And the words just get piled on like the most amazing treasure mountain of jewels and mountains upon mountains of jewel words about these jewel capacities of the Buddhas. And there's this sense that, these Buddhas and bodhisattvas no longer needing a physical body, but they can manifest any body they want. They're just in such ongoing dynamic glory. And at the heart of all of it is this non-moving, non-changing, non-dynamic, but utterly quiescent, utterly still, absolute Buddha nature. So you can even apply that sudden awakening and gradual cultivation to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. It's like they're always established as unborn, formless, unarising, changeless Buddha nature, and on the manifest level of some kind of personhood, totally, at their point, totally suffused with the suprapersonal divinity or Buddha nature. It's very dynamic in their expression. And so this is what the human life can be for each and every one. Right now, no hesitation, no delay. You are the Buddha nature. Is it clear that you are not merely a body, sense of sensations, perceptions, samskaras, and personal consciousness? You are the absolute right now. No excuse. And
Beautiful.
there is a life happening that gets called a certain name, whatever your name is that your parents gave you or a teacher gave you or something, or you adopted. And it's playing out all these samskaras. Let them be wholesome and trust that they can be really wholesome when you relax and trust and see good and feel goodness everywhere, when you trust that God or the Buddha nature is the true nature of everyone and everything, there will be such inspiration, such joy, such love, spontaneous love. You don't have to try to love someone. You can't help but fall in love with everyone. That is what happened. The proof of this is when I was just this selfish kid, totally addicted to sports. And I went through this really profound existential crisis where I felt like, offing the self, ending this life, because I was having all these knee injuries that were making it clear that there was zero future in athletics for this kid. And at age
You found the
16,
dukkha.
yeah, total dukkha. The dreams were all dark and disordered and weird and everything, and life just seemed meaningless. Of course, they had us reading the existentialists like Camus and Sartre and Kafka in high school, which not good, I think, for high school kids who are undergoing identity
Hormonal.
crisis. Those
Right.
Jesuits in my Jesuit prep school, high school, Loyola in downtown LA. I lived over on the west side. But anyway, it was all contributing to that total existential nightmare. And suddenly one day, there's just this boom, wake up out in the backyard, just doing a few calisthenics. I've done loads of calisthenics because I'm so athletic. But that one particular day, it all just opened up and it was clear. We are made of divine love. We're made of God. This whole cosmos is made of God. How else could it exist? They would all just disappear in the next millisecond if there was no power powering this, divine power. So I began to use this word reality a lot because it was clear to me reality is God. God is the true reality, dreaming all of us, being all of us. And all by the way of that point of spontaneously, you become so much more loving when you just trust that the divine is the actual reality of everyone and everything, and the great no thing hosting the whole play of everyone and everything. I would look at people and my jaw would drop. And not just people, I kept a little magnifying glass on my little desk for schoolwork because the little bugs would sometimes work their way in around the screen or something. I wanted to see their faces up close, those 4 eyes or 8 eyes or whatever they had. And it was clear to me God is appearing as everyone and everything. And of course, everyone thought I was on drugs like LSD, and I never touched any of that. I never smoked a joint. It's just obviously true, not as an object, but that God is the subject of all. God is the self of all, the life in every sentient life. God is the sentience by which sentient beings are sentient. So our sentience is not our own. Our consciousness is not our own. Our life is not our own. It happens by the stupendous prana shakti, vital power, divine grace. Kripa, divine grace.
Yeah, you had this experience yourself. I'm so glad you shared that because, we'll share the beginning at the end in a mystically paradoxical way here as we start to wrap up. But thanks so much for sharing. And it's clear that that it is embodied for you, this level of awareness and compassion and loving kindness to all beings. It's real, and I think that's what I'm trying to do with my work, is to tell people you're not dirty. Original sin is a lie. You have it, and read the mystics. Maybe the existentialists when the time is right, but let's point folks to the veil breakers. Let's point people to the men and women who have accessed the inaccessible and the most inherently accessible, right? They can show us.
Ramana Maharshi would look at people and he did not see them as anyone other than the divine self. He was so all gracious. Anandamayi Ma, all the great ones, they see you as an incredibly miraculous ego-g viewpoint, but transparent for the divine. Call it whatever you want, the Tao, the Buddha nature, the great self, as all the cions and masters speak of, the true self, beyond the five aggregate self. And so there's this all graciousness that nothing is wrong with you. In your essence, you are whole, complete, nothing lacking, because spiritual awareness is your real nature. The absolute being is your beingness. It wouldn't exist otherwise as a set of experiential, vivid sensations and perceptions and interrelationships and so forth. So may it be so. May all be awake. May all know the safety, the true safety of being the one who alone is, the deathless, the immortal. May all be happy in the true blissful state. May all be one with the divine grace, love, peace.
I almost don't want to add anything after that ending. Thanks for listening to this episode of Karmic Relief with Timothy Conway. I love his deep experiential embodiment of mystic philosophy so much. It's contagious. My goal for this podcast is to have men and women across every tradition, every background, every age group on this thing. People that really live it. And Timothy is such a true example. Check out his incredible book, Women of Power and Grace, and his website, enlightened-spirituality.org. This website is from 2006. 125 original essays, over 3,400 pages of material about spirituality and mystic philosophy. May all beings be happy and free.